This is not clickbait, ladies and gentlemen. Marvel Comics just killed Moon Knight. So this opens up with Moon Knight as well as Hunter Moon and Tigra basically tracking down the Black Spectre. Now, for those of you guys who need to get caught up, as always, you'll find a link to the playlist at the end of this video. But Hunter's Moon is basically this other version of Moon Knight that we never really knew about before, that Mark Spector wasn't the only one to gain the quote-unquote Moon Knight powers from Konshu. It's a really cool story, and he's actually a really, really cool character. But you also end up getting 8-Ball, right? Now, 8-Ball was just the super old-school villain. He was wildly irrelevant. He still is, and he actually flies a giant 8-Ball. But he's really here as more of a distraction than anything else, because what this does is it allows Moon Knight and his guys to get into the building. The reason for this is because they're on a timetable, right? Black Spectre's whole goal here is to literally just kind of emit this sonic pulse throughout the city that will drive everybody insane and send the entire city into madness. Now, where that seems like a ridiculous scheme, we'll actually find out towards the end of this that his goal is a lot simpler than that, and that it's all just kind of a giant ruse. But the whole point with this is that it would make very little sense, given their timetable, to fight from the bottom of the building all the way to the top. And instead, they just kind of end up in there like halfway through. And then at that point, as they're making their way through, Tigra steps on a pressure plate. And when that happens, that pressure plate actually has a bomb under it. So there's seemingly nowhere she can go. Now, Mark Spector, of course, ends up basically running off and saying, hey, I'll come back and I'll help you. You literally just kind of have to stay here, because the instant you move, that thing's going to detonate and you're going to die, right? So the building is just kind of filled with traps. As for everybody else, characters like Reese, who's a vampire, Soldier, who's also a vampire, and they work directly alongside Mark Spector. Reese is sent back to the Midnight Mission, which is Mark Spector's base of operations, literally a living house. Woe betide the poor soul that walks into that house with nefarious purposes, because they'll basically be consumed and driven insane by the house itself. It's really cool. It's really amazing. But the kicker here is that as he makes his way through, you have, of course, him fighting a whole host of different henchmen. And this is one thing to understand. There's a difference between Mark Spector fighting some henchmen for the purpose of just incapacitating them because they're just kind of a nuisance, versus Mark Spector fighting to kill. This is the second, and he's taking every one of these guys out with extreme prejudice, right? It's one of the coolest things that I love about Jed MacKay's Moon Knight right now, is you get to see everything and all the amazing details that we all know and love about his character. But the thing about this is that as it all happens, Zodiac chimes into Black Spectre. Now, Zodiac was a villain that was introduced quite some time ago. I wouldn't go as far as to say was like the Joker of the Moon Knight mythos. You could kind of argue that, but he was more or less just kind of a returned character who was just kind of like a major villain at the beginning of the story. But one of the things that he tells Black Spectre is, you cannot plan for Moon Knight, right? He's a chaos agent. Anything he touches, it completely spins out of control. And that's true, right? Moon Knight is kind of the answer to the question, what if chaos in its most pure form were given a physical form and then thrust into any situation? It's not to say he's some kind of a mindless beast, but he's the thing you can't account for. And that's when Zodiac tells Black Spectre, and let me tell you, it's a lot more fun when it's not happening to me this time. But that's when Spectre says, faith, Zodiac, the plan is in motion. Even Moon Knight can't stop it. And that's an important thing to know here, is that what Black Spectre had kind of done, really operating behind the scenes, is over the course of this story, the entire Jed MacKay run, all these different enemies that Moon Knight was fighting were all kind of thrown at him by Black Spectre, to kind of weaken him, soften him up, but to also work as a distraction so that Black Spectre could just kind of go forward with his plans. Because if there were no distraction here, Moon Knight would have figured out what was going on at some point, right? Like, someone's taking out this guy, someone's taking out that guy, someone's stealing their technology, somebody wants to do a thing, let's go find out who this person is and defeat them, right? And the story would have wrapped up fairly quickly. And so all these guys are either directly or indirectly working for Black Spectre. But in the midst of Spectre's conversation with Moon Knight, that's when Mark shows up. And the cool thing here is there's this amazing back and forth, right? Where Black Spectre says, I didn't think you'd make it, Moon Knight, not through all those fighters, those weapons, all those traps. I'm glad you did though. I'm glad I could beat you to death myself. I've wanted to take another shot at you for a long time. So that's one of the things, is because we don't know who Black Spectre is. Even now, we don't don't know who he is. But one of the clues that have been dropped over the years is that Black Spectre has known who Moon Knight is for quite some time. Now, Moon Knight has fought against Black Spectre before, and I know those statements sound contradictory and they sound confusing. Black Spectre is like a mantle. It's something that like different people have had over time, and they faced off against Moon Knight at different points in time. So while Moon Knight recognizes Black Spectre as a villain, there's no telling who's actually under the mask. And that's where Black Spectre says, one of us dies tonight, and if it's you, I'm sending this whole city with you, right? The whole city is going to go insane. The response of Mark works for me. Now, one thing I do want to do here for a second is I do want to sidetrack, and I want to focus on Zodiac for a quick minute. And this is actually a really cool moment. The reason why is because Zodiac's been sent on a separate mission, right, by the Black Spectre. And it's actually one that Mark Spectre, or that Moon Knight, predicted was going to happen. The Black Spectre was going to send someone after the Midnight mission. And that's exactly what Zodiac does, right? Zodiac goes to the Midnight mission with the intention of tearing the place up. But that is literally when Reese shows up, hence the reason why she had been sent back there. And the two of them are kind of fighting back and forth and doing their thing. And Reese recently did learn the ability to turn into a kind of mist when she was training with Blade. It was only a small little moment in the comic. No, we never got a Moon Knight Blade crossover in Jed McKay's run. Yes, we're all disappointed. Right? But it's the one thing that Zodiac didn't account for. He didn't realize that Reese had this ability. And so Reese literally tells him, I learned a new trick too, turning into mist. You're coming off desperate, Zodiac. And so she says, the last time you came for me, you would not cross the mission's threshold. That was a good instinct because you're not walking out again. And she says, mission, take him. And Zodiac is basically taken by the house. Now, how you're taken by the house and what it looks like is relative. And in fact, we won't really explicitly see what happens with Zodiac himself, but he is going to escape. And in fact, something really cool is going to happen as a result of it. But focusing back on Moon Knight, right? Focusing back on Mark, the reason why you guys are all here. One of the things that does happen with Tigra, kind of wrapping up these few little plot threads here, Tigra is ultimately saved from the pressure plate by Soldier, who, before he became a vampire, basically dealt with like demolitions and stuff like that in the military, so he knows how to like defuse bombs and different things like that. Hunter's Moon is taking out a guy named Sarnak, specifically Sydney Sarnak. It's just kind of a little beef between them, but the main show here really is Moon Knight and Black Spectre, and the fight is pretty intense. Knockdown, drag out. Because with this fight between the two of them, Moon Knight is tired. And that's the big difference between the two, right? Black Spectre is fresh. This guy has not been fighting. He's not been in massive conflict. He's just kind of doing his thing. Moon Knight has fought himself up half a building. And even if it's not a full building, it's still enough to make him tired. To say nothing of the fact that all the different schemes and different things along those lines have been happening almost back to back to back to back, right? Like destroying a vampire and his entire ilk using holy water from a sprinkler system, right? All these different things have all happened seemingly one day after another with small little reprieves in between. So it's almost kind of like a game of death type thing where like Bruce Lee's fighting his way through the tower all the way up to the top, right? It's that sort of situation, right? Like a gauntlet basically. And so one of the things that happens is Moon Knight asks the question, why are you trying to kill the city, Black Spectre? Who are you? And he asked this question because historically speaking, Black Spectre was never a guy that would like try to wipe out a whole city. Black Spectre's target, more often than not, regardless of who was behind the mask, was always directly Moon Knight. And a lot of that's because whether it is a Warren Ellis comic or a Doug Mink comic from back in the day, Moon Knight's stories were never really grandiose in scale. It was never like Moon Knight is saving the whole world from like some guy with a crazy scheme. Sometimes it would kind of be, but once you actually get into the story itself, it's just a guy that wants to kill Moon Knight. But specifically with Black Spectre, his target was always Moon Knight. And so it's weird for him to suddenly come along and to say, I want to take out the entirety of the city, right? I want to wipe out everybody in the city, drive them insane, kill everybody, all that kind of stuff. It's very uncharacteristic. But Moon Knight does not get a straight answer to the question of who Black Spectre is. The answer he gets here is like, I'm a ghost, right? I'm your ghost, and I'm going to haunt you to your grave. So we could take this at face value, that it's like somebody Moon Knight has known in the past, which it actually is, Or we could take it as like a metaphorical thing, right? Like I represent the sum total of all these different people that have been harmed by your actions, different things along those lines, which would be kind of cool because that was the victim syndicate from the Batman comics back in the day, right? So again, there's all kinds of possibilities here on who this guy would be. And as we're going through this, I do want you guys to post comments and let me know who you think it is. I feel like the number one statement is going to be Raul Bushman. I feel like most people are going to say that's him. But the cool thing here is that kind of transitioning back to Zodiac for a second, this is an important thing, right? Zodiac does make it out of the house, right? He does make it out of the house in one piece. But what happens here is that he's kind of spit back out by the house. And when even Reese herself is kind of taken surprise by the whole thing, one of the things that Zodiac makes a statement of is that to him, it's all just a giant game. Because at the end of the day, no matter what happens with Black Spectre, Moon Knight can always come back. Because that's one of the important things to understand. Whenever Moon Knight is physically killed, that Moon Knight can be brought back by Konshu. But, before you leave the video, like, okay, so he's not really gonna die. Moon Knight cannot resurrect. He's all out of resurrections. When he dies, that's it. There's no bringing him back. Specifically because of the fact that Konshu is imprisoned. He has been ever since the fight with the Avengers where Moon Knight defeated Konshu and Konshu was locked up by the Avengers in Asgard. He doesn't have the sum total of his powers. He can't just bring him back. And even if he could, one of the things that Hunter's Moon revealed is that Moon Knights can only return a certain number of times. Once they die the final time, they join Konshu in his hall of former Moon Knights and somebody else is chosen to take Moon Knight's place. So again, it's a really, really cool thing. Like there really are stakes here, right? Like this dude is going to die. So it's really, really awesome because one of the things that Reese tells Zodiac is there are no more resurrections, right? Like if Black Spectre kills Mark, he's not coming back. And Zodiac didn't know that because Zodiac, and this is why a lot of people say he's kind of like the Joker for Moon Knight, Zodiac's whole thing was kind of the cat and mouse game. He chases Moon Knight chases him, and that's really all it is. But then he says like, no, like he always comes back. He has to. And the response of Reese is, you better hope he survives, Zodiac, because otherwise you've missed your shot. Let the Spectre take it, right? That is one of these things where if you can't kill Moon Knight, Black Spectre is going to, right? So he'll do it before you get a chance. So again, it's a really kind of cool back and forth type thing here. But again, switching back to Moon Knight himself, right? Mark Spectre and Black Spectre. What ends up happening just because of how, I wouldn't say exhausted, but because of the fact that Black Spectre kind of has the upper hand here in this fight between the two of them, he throws one of his, moon rings, whatever it is. Basically the Moon Knight version of batarangs is really all it is. But it misses him, right? And that's when he kind of gets taunted by Black Spectre, with Black Spectre saying like, you're tired, right? You missed your shot. And the response of Mark is, no, like I'm not as tired as you think I am. And I didn't miss. Like I was literally offering this as a distraction. He overcomes Black Spectre, tears this guy apart, rips off the mask, only to find out that it's Ryan Trent. Here's the thing, right? Ryan Trent is historically speaking a guy who at one point was pretty screwed up in the head. But the idea of this is that he would don the mantle of Black Spectre, right? And then he would in turn kill Mark Spectre. And the hope was that he would kind of earn respect within the police department and be offered some measure of a promotion. It all went sideways and then in turn became an enemy of Mark Spectre. That's the most recent iteration of Black Spectre in Marvel Comics, right? The funny thing about that is that in this moment, when you have Mark talking to like Hunter's Moon and talking to Tigra, and they're all saying, okay, like we're on our way up, we'll help you dismantle the system and all that kind of stuff. Mark gets shot up from behind, right? Gets shot to pieces from behind. And that's when the real Black Spectre shows up. Ryan Trent was a ruse. It was a trick. It was never actually the Black Spectre, right? That Ryan Trent really did want to kill Mark. So somewhere along the line, Black Spectre approached Ryan Trent and said, hey man, like, do you want to pretend to be the Black Spectre again? And do you want to take out Mark Spectre? Of course Ryan would say yes to that, all the while unaware of the fact that he was being used for his own ends. But when Black Spectre shows up here, he says, your friends are coming, Mark. I can't have that. Let's have a little privacy. And it detonates that entire section of the building. And then in turn, it like cuts off their ability to access Mark and Black Spectre. And so then at that point, the Spectre says, we can have a nice little chat just like we used to. And Mark in turn asks the question, like, what in the world is going on here, right? Like, why would you do this? Like, I'm gonna destroy you as best I can. But the reality here is Mark is like fatally injured. There's no way for him to come back from this, right? And even Black Spectre says, like, forgive the deception, Mark, but Ryan Trent really did want to kill you, and I needed a little more time to make sure everything was ready, because let's face it, you've been a real fly in the ointment. Right from the start, interrupting the work I'd hired Commodore Donnie Planet to do, right? Basically, the very beginnings of this whole scheme that started all the way back in Moon Knight issue #1 from Jed McKay's run. But Mark Spector's kind of caught unawares here. He's like, you're supposed to be dead, right? Like, I killed you. Like, how are you still here? And Mark's response is like, you killed my shadow cabinet, right? You killed my friend, you killed Sigmund, you killed Plesko. And his response is, Plesko, yes, well, speak the devil's name and he shall appear. Only for us to find out it was Plesko the entire time. Now, here's the cool thing about this. Plesko has been around in Marvel Comics for quite some time, but in terms of this story, he was kind of brought in as the guy who, one, interviewed Zodiac when Zodiac was in the institution to kind of understand why he did the sort of things he did, because Plesko is a psychologist, right? The other thing here is he says, yes, Mark, I am alive. I am the Black Spectre. And he says, the first Black Spectre wanted the city to love him. My aim is a little simpler. I just want to watch as it goes insane and kills itself. And he says, I've been very good at hiding what I am, Mark, my interests. All the time we've known each other, you never knew. And you, of all people, should have thought it odd that a trained psychologist would embark on a mercenary career in North Africa. It's curiosity, Mark. That's all. Just pure and simple curiosity. It's like I told you on Hard Island, I am a student of atrocity. I like to see all the horrible things people do to one another. And there was plenty of that in the Karnak cowboy days, wasn't there? But then Layla died, and then you did. You were the toughest man I'd ever met, the most bloody, unkillable creature I'd ever encountered. I couldn't believe that someone could manage to put you down. So I had to go see for myself. And so this is the cool thing here, right? Plesko goes all the way back to the early days when Mark Spector was a mercenary working for Raoul Bushman. And there is an accuracy in this statement that it's really weird that it never occurred to Mark why a psychologist would come along on a mercenary mission. It's so strange, right? And that for Plesko himself, he really did hide the fact that the guy is just obsessed with just insanity and why people do horrible things. He sees humanity as a kind of experiment in a lot of ways. And so following the death of Mark Spector and Layla at the hands of Raoul Bushman, he goes to visit him, right? And he asks the question like, are you the guy that killed Mark Spector? And the response of Bushman is yes, right? Like, was he a friend of yours? I'd be happy to send you to visit if you have a problem with it, right? I'm Raoul Bushman. I'm the guy you're looking for. But unlike what Raoul Bushman expected, which was for this guy to basically try to take him out, instead he says like, I want to work for you, right? I want to see all the things that Mark saw. I want to delve my hands down into the idea of insanity, right? Into why people do such terrible things. And what he tells Mark is, I learned a great deal from Bushman. He was an artist with a machete and a Kalashnikov. He showed me so many interesting things. Then later, you and I started working together again. As Moon Knight, you left a bloody wake behind you like a shark. Now, this is one of the reasons why this is so incredibly important. One of the things that Plesko had done over his time was basically provide psychological profiles for the various targets that Moon Knight was going after. It's the other role he played, because for Moon Knight to psychologically understand why it is that a person was doing what they were doing, what their real fears were, and all that kind of stuff, it would be a way for Moon Knight to kind of overtake this person. It would be a way for Moon Knight to actually bring their greatest fears to life and to use those fears against them, to kind of get under their skin, so to speak. But what happens is Plesko says, I am bored with being a mere observer, a minnow in your wake. I wanted greater vistas of terror and atrocity. I wanted to put my hand in. My curiosity was no longer satisfied with the works of others. So I took my inspiration from you, Mark. Your drama of masks and capes. He took notes from virtually every single thing that he was a part of. Every time Moon Knight went on a campaign, he took notes, studying what Moon Knight had done. Every time that Mark Spectre was a mercenary, he took notes. The whole 9 yards. He was all a part of this. And so once it's all said and done, he's like, excuse me, that would be the broadcast system. It's ready. And he says, it's really been nice catching up. I have a helicopter to catch, but I want you to know I've always valued your friendship. Goodbye, Mark, and just leaves this guy to die. Now, in this current situation, it doesn't really look like Mark Spectre would be killed, right? I mean, it's just Mark Spectre who's bleeding because he's been shot up, but this is where the kicker comes into play. Mark Spectre, in this moment where he's dying, prays to Konshu, and Konshu appears in a spiritual form, and he says, I cannot help you, my son. My power is exhausted. I can do nothing, imprisoned as I am. And where Mark says, like, I'm dying, the response of Konshu, I know you are, my son, and you are dying in my service, whether you acknowledge it or not. Even in your rejection of me, your betrayal, you have distinguished yourself. For what it's worth, I am proud of you. I cannot help you, but I will await you, my son, when you can take your seat at my side. So like, this guy's gonna die. Not even Konshu can bring him back. And instead, all he really gets here is the kind of effort and the energy he needs to shut down the broadcast system, because even if he can't save his own life, he can save the city. And so in this instance where he's like, I can't do it alone, Steve Grant and Jake Lockley appear, right? His alternate personalities, they show up, and it's like, you're never alone. Remember, like, you can definitely do this, man. Like, this is what you're good at. You take the hit and do what needs to be done. And so using the kind of moral support, if we want to call it that, of these guys who, a combination of talking to him, trying to bring him up, but also like screaming at him and telling him to like get off his backside and to get up there and hit the system and shut it down, he's ultimately able to do it, right? He's ultimately able to shut this broadcast system down. But even in this recognition that Mark Spectre's dying, Tigra, Hunter's Moon, Soldier, right? They're kind of hearing all of this. And Tigra herself has this idea of just like racing off and trying to find a way to save Mark. But the response of Hunter's Moon is, no, you can't do that. Right? You cannot do that. This is a Mark Spectre thing, right? Like Mark Spectre's ability to die, right? Like his death meaning something, that only comes from him. And if you run up there, you are going to rob him of deciding how he dies, because his death is inevitable. So let him be the one to shut the system down. Let him be the one to deactivate it. Let his death mean something to him. And so in that moment, he does exactly that, right? He gets to the system, he shuts it down, and basically saves everybody in the entire city of New York. But in order to do this, the system is destroyed, right? It's detonated, it blows up. So you get this kind of amazing final call, right? Where Jake Lockley's like, last call, boys, it's been an honor. And the response of Steve Grant is, gentlemen, light the candles, right? And then Mark Spectre presses the button, blows the system to pieces, has this small recollection, right? Everybody has these kind of small recollections of these last moments with Mark Spectre, the last moments they really spent with him, how much he meant to them. Mark Spectre detonates it, the entire system blows up, and Mark goes with it, right? Mark's dead. And so as a final end to this, right? As a final end to this, let us not forget Zodiac, because what happens in this epilogue is that Black Spectre gets back to his base of operations and he's like, what happened? Why didn't it work? And the response of Zodiac, I told you, you cannot plan for Moon Knight. And he says, you failed, Plesko. In the supervillain game, there's a price to be paid for failure. But more than that, you hurt my feelings. You took Moon Knight from me. You killed him and he's not coming back. You took what was mine. You can't plan for Moon Knight, Plesko, but I have a plan for you. If atrocity is what you want, I'm going to give you the full experience up close. And so this last little bit that we get here is this guy who's at the midnight mission, just this random dude. And he's like, is he really gone? Because I need help. And Mr. Knight was the only one who could help me. And the response is, yes, he's gone. And it hurts all of us every single night. He died doing his work. Yes, he's gone, but the midnight mission remains. The charter, the mission that he created remains. So welcome to the midnight mission. My name is Reese. How can we help? Yes, Moon Knight's dead, but his team carries on. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know what you thought about this down in the comments section. And if you need to get caught up on Moon Knight and you want to see the whole thing, make sure you click this link to the playlist, and I will catch you all later. Peace.